Hello everybody, welcome to a quick little guide on Tarisland's Frost Mage spec. If you're looking for a similar guide on the Flame Mage spec, check out the link in the description below or the pop-up up above. Now in terms of how it compares to the Flame Mage, I do think that the Flame Mage has a slightly higher DPS ceiling, but because it's so finicky and so ping dependent, you'll find that the Frost Mage is much more consistent and usually a better DPS than the Flame Mage is. Now, in contrast to the Flame Mage, which has a nice little skill rotation, the Frost Mage is more about making decisions on the fly. Now, before we dive into the skills, I want to mention that there's another version of this skill called Icicle Storm. In fact, Icicle Storm is the base version of this skill. You can unlock Arctic Icicle using talents, which we'll talk about in a second, and I found that Arctic Icicle is just a little bit better than Icicle Storm, but you can still use Icicle Storm if you'd prefer. For this guide though, we'll use Arctic Icicle. Now the Frost Mage, unlike most of the classes, actually has 3 different resources to maintain. The main 2 to worry about is water energy and ice energy. So this class is based around building up water energy, converting it to ice energy, and using that ice energy for big damage. We'll talk a little bit more about how to gain those 2 forms of energy in just a second, but for now, you just need to understand that you can have up to a maximum of 90 energy, and each of these spikes here on the bottom of the screen here represents 30 stacks of energy. Also, water energy and ice energy don't really go away for a while after you leave battle, so you don't have to worry about it disappearing on you between mobs in a dungeon. Okay, so the first skill that the Frost Mage has is Water Bomb. Now Water Bomb is your basic single target attack, and it does a little bit of damage in 2 hits to whoever you targeted. Now it's not a lot of damage, but the bigger thing about this skill is that it gives you 7 water energy every time you use it. So if I go ahead and use it now, you'll notice that my water energy bar is now starting to fill up. The next skill is Ice Spikeweed. Now, Ice Spikeweed does a little bit more damage than Water Bomb, but more importantly, it converts water energy into ice energy. In fact, it converts up to 30 stacks of water energy into 30 stacks of ice energy. Also, the damage done by Ice Spikeweed is higher the more stacks of water energy you have, up to 30, which means that if you use it when you have 30 water energy, you'll do as much damage as possible. As you can see here, I've got about 50 water energy accumulated here, because remember, each spike is 30. And if I use Ice Spikeweed now, it'll convert 30 of that into ice energy on the same bar. So now I've got 30 ice energy and 20 water energy. Now I can use Ice Spikeweed again, but you'll notice that I'm doing less damage if I convert just 20 stacks of water energy instead of 30. So when you're using Ice Spikeweed, you should try to make sure that you have at least 30 stacks of water energy to convert. The third skill is Arctic Icicle. Now Arctic Icicle actually has 2 modes, both of which are very high damage nukes. The first mode, the base mode, has a bit of a channeling time of 2 seconds in which you can't move or jump, but it does some nice damage and it doesn't consume any ice energy. You'll see here if I use it, I'll channel for 2 seconds and it'll rain down some icicles which do a nice little chunk of damage and will not consume ice energy. The second mode, Instant Arctic Icicle, does not have any channeling time and will do significantly more damage, but it requires 90 ice energy and will consume 90 ice energy. So to use it, we have to first build up our ice energy, which we can do by first building up water energy. And once we have 90 of that, we can convert it all into ice energy. And once we have 90 ice energy, we can use Instant Arctic Icicle to do a lot more damage than the base version of that skill. The next skill, skill 4, is Water Spirit. Now this summons a little jellyfish looking water spirit near the target that you've selected, which quickly moves to that target and explodes. This actually does do a very nice chunk of damage, but more importantly, as soon as you use this skill, you'll start gaining a lot of water energy really quickly for 3 seconds. In fact, you'll gain a total of 45. We can increase that with talents, but we'll talk about those later. So this is actually a very good way to gain water energy stacks for you to convert into ice energy stacks. Remember that Ice Spikeweed actually has no cooldown, so if you have the water energy stacks ready, you can convert it all into ice energy back to back to back. So to show you what Water Spirit looks like, I can summon it and you'll see that a little jellyfish shows up, and then after a few moments it'll explode and do a nice chunk of damage. You can see I did almost 1.7k non-crit. The next skill, skill 5, is Snowstorm. Now this is a nice little AoE that does a good amount of damage to all enemies in a small area, which also applies slow. Now that's not super useful for PvE, but slow is quite useful for PvP. This is another channel skill, but the damage happens throughout the channeling, not at the end. But again, you can't move or jump while you're using this skill. Now for single targets like a boss, this skill isn't very useful because you have to channel it and the damage isn't very high, but since it has no cooldown, for groups of mobs, this actually comes in really handy. The next skill, Ice Increase, is your basic class self buff. This increases your combo rate, combo damage, and attack for 8 seconds, and it's very nice to pop before your big damage skills. And so if I use Ice Increase now, I'll just get that little buff for 8 seconds. There it is. And finally, the Inscribe Stone skill for this class isn't very crazy. All that it does is for 6 seconds, Water Bomb will give you a lot more water energy than it normally would. So it is nice to build up those water stacks to convert into ice stacks, but in general, it's nothing crazy. So let's talk a little bit more about talents. Now this may not be the most optimized talent build, but for me, in my experience, these are the talents that I've found to be most useful in maximizing DPS. The first passive is Water Bomb Plus. Now we use Water Bomb a lot with this spec. In fact, it's our most common way to gain water energy stacks. So the increase in base damage and the ability to get an extra water energy is pretty useful. The next talent, Frost Expertise, is also very useful because it increases the damage dealt by attacks that consume ice energy by 20%. Now in our case, that would be Instant Arctic Icicle, which is our big damage skill, so increasing the damage of that further is actually really nice. Next, you've got Frost Mastery, which is really nice to get combo rate up by 3%, which is actually a pretty significant amount. For this class, you want to be aiming for at least about 42% combo rate, so this passive helps you get to that level faster. The next talent is Crystal. Now this is a talent that I highly recommend anyone picks up, and what it does is that whenever you use Ice Spikeweed with 30, 60 or 90 water energy, the damage of the next attack is increased by 18%. Now we talked about this earlier and we discussed how we always do want to use Ice Spikeweed when we have 30, 60 or 90 water because we want to convert 30 water energy into 30 ice energy all at once. So this gives you a nice little damage boost with the next skill after that without you having to do anything extra. This is especially useful because after Ice Spikeweed, we typically end up using Instant Arctic Icicle, a big damage skill, so this will boost that damage even further. The next talent is Arctic Icicle itself, of course, which replaces Icicle Storm, which is the base version of this skill. Again, I think Arctic Icicle is a little bit better than Icicle Storm, but if you want to use Icicle Storm, it's still really good. The next talent is Element Cluster. With this talent, every time you use Water Bomb, it adds a stack of damage boost to Water Spirit, and this stacks up to 20. So if you have 20 stacks of this boost by using Water Bomb 20 times, Water Spirit will do 40% more damage. Now this, again, you don't really have to think about. When you use the rotation, you're going to build up those stacks kind of automatically, so this is really nice to have kind of as a passive buff. Next, we've got Cold Energy. Now this one's a little bit interesting. Whenever you use Instant Arctic Icicle, you get 1 Cold Energy. Then, if you have Cold Energy, Arctic Icicle, the base form which is channeled, will do more damage based on how many stacks of Cold Energy you have. Typically, you want to stack it up all the way to 3, which is the max stack of Cold Energy, before you use the base Arctic Icicle, because that gives you a damage boost of 600%, which is very large. In fact, with 3 stacks of Cold Energy, base Arctic Icicle will out damage Instant Arctic Icicle. Now this might not be fully intuitive at first, so let me show you how it works. So you can see here, I've got 90 stacks of ice energy built up, and there's a little counter below it saying 1. Now that's how many charges of cold energy I have, and I got that by using Instant Arctic Icicle. In fact, if I use Instant Arctic Icicle again right now, I'll get another stack. Now I've got 2 stacks of cold energy. So with these 2 stacks, I could use Arctic Icicle in its base form, and it'll do significantly more damage than it would do normally. And now with 3 stacks of cold energy, instead of doing that 500 I did just now, I'll do more than double that. So this talent is actually kind of a must-have if you're going for this Arctic Icicle route, because it increases the DPS that you can do by a lot. We'll talk about how to build up these stacks efficiently when we talk about rotations in just a bit. The next talent is Drowning. Now Drowning isn't anything crazy. It basically just counts how many times you use Water Bomb, and every 10 times that you use it, you'll do a little bit extra damage. Now this isn't very significant, but it's effortless and you don't really have to think about it at all. So it's a nice little passive boost. Next, we have Burst Icicle. This adds on to the previous talent we got, Cold Energy, making it so that Water Spirit, when you use it, will give you 1 cold energy per use. Given that cold energy stacks up to 3, getting 1 just by using a skill that you're using already anyway is actually a really nice boost. It does also reduce the casting time of Arctic Icicle by 50%, but I wouldn't recommend focusing the usage of Water Spirit on that too much, and rather just using Water Spirit to build up those water stacks as you were before. As you can see here, I've got no stacks of cold energy right now. If I use a Water Spirit, I'll quickly gain 1 stack. Next is Icicle Plus. Now this is another must-have for this build, and it is nice because you'll get to this anyway by following this line. Now this is a must-have for 2 reasons. The first is that it doubles the damage that instant Arctic Icicle does, which is a big boost for our big damaging skill. The next is that whenever you use the base version of Arctic Icicle, there's a chance, based on the number of cold energy stacks you have, to get 90 ice energy. Now 90 ice energy is the maximum stack, and it'll allow us to use instant Arctic Icicle immediately. And in fact, with this talent, if you use Arctic Icicle, the base version, with 3 cold energy, you will actually gain 90 ice energy every time, because there'll be a 100% chance to do so. So to demonstrate that, here I've got 3 stacks of cold energy and no stacks of ice energy. So if I use Arctic Icicle here, the base form, you'll see that it'll do a ton of damage, and it'll give me 90 stacks of ice energy instantly, which means that now I can use instant Arctic Icicle again. Next, we've got Water Spirit Plus. Now this is a nice little damage boost to Water Spirit itself, and makes it so that when you use it, you'll gain 15 more water energy instantly. Now remember, Water Spirit gives water energy over time, over 3 seconds, 15 per second. So this passive doesn't actually increase the amount you get per second, and instead just gives you 15 more water energy flat out. So instead of Water Spirit giving you 45 total, it'll give 60 total, which is still very nice. Next, we've got Ice Increase Plus, which just makes Ice Increase last a bit longer and boost your stats by a little bit more. This is nice because the stat boost given by Ice Increase is pretty significant. So the fact that it lasts 2 seconds longer, when in its base form it lasts 8 seconds, so now it goes from 8 to 10, is pretty significant. Finally, we've got Ice Water Bomb. This makes it so that when you have Ice Increase active, which now lasts for 10 seconds, whenever you use Water Bomb, it'll give you ice energy directly instead of giving water energy, which you then later have to convert. Now this isn't super significant because Ice Spikeweed is actually really nice damage, so you kind of want to be using that anyway, but it's still nice to have because it means that you'll get to those big damage Arctic Icicles and instant Arctic Icicles just a little bit faster. Okay, so now that we've got our talents out of the way and we've boosted a lot of the skills that we're going to use, let's talk a little bit about rotations. Now, for this class, there are no singular rotations. Since the class involves 3 different resources, your water energy, your ice energy, and your cold energy, which is a lot more than most other classes. For example, the Flame Mage has just 1 resource to work with, which is heat. So because we have so many resources to manage, you have to make decisions on the fly based on what's available and the stacks of those resources you have at any given time. So the best way to visualize the rotations for this class is by using a flowchart. Okay, so here we've got a little flowchart on what skill to use at what time. You'll notice little badges next to the arrows which symbolize water energy, ice energy, and cold energy respectively. Now you'll also notice that this flowchart is divided into 2 parts. The part on the left is your main loop, and the part on the right, which starts with the golden bubble, is what you'd be doing whenever you have 3 charges of cold energy. So regardless of which part of the loop on the left you're in, you should be switching to the right loop whenever you have 3 charges of cold energy. Now all of that looks great on paper, but what does that look like in practice? Well, here's how a few complete loops of this flowchart looks like in game. So you want to start out with Water Spirit, which will start giving you water energy. Then you want to start spamming Water Bomb to get more water energy until you have 90 water energy. Once you have that, you can use Ice Spikeweed to convert all of that water energy into ice energy. Once you have 90 ice energy, you can use Instant Arctic Icicle to gain 1 stack of cold energy and to do some nice damage. Once that's done, we're going to go back to spamming Water Bomb to gain 90 water energy again. And now, since we have 2 stacks of cold energy, we're going to use Ice Increase before we use Ice Spikeweed to do a little extra damage. Then, once we've got 90 ice energy, we're going to use Instant Arctic Icicle, which is going to give us our 3rd cold energy, which means that it's now time to use the base version of Arctic Icicle with 3 cold energy charges. Now this will do a lot of damage, and it'll give us 90 ice energy for us to use instant Arctic Icicle again. Now you might notice that sometimes Water Spirit is available and sometimes Water Spirit isn't available. On the loops where Water Spirit is available, it tends to be much faster for you to get to 3 charges of cold energy. And that's all there is to it. Now you may also wonder why we waited until we had 90 charges of water energy before we started using Ice Spikeweed. We did that because Ice Spikeweed has 0 cooldown, and before you're using Ice Spikeweed, we can use Ice Increase when it's available and we're at 2 cold energy charges so that we can boost our damage, then use Ice Spikeweed 3 times in a row, which also does a very significant chunk of damage, followed by your triple nuke combo of Instant Arctic Icicle, and Instant Arctic Icicle again. The other thing I want to point out is that Ice Increase is not affected by global cooldowns. Now if you didn't know, whenever you use a skill, there's a small global cooldown that affects every single skill on your action bar. You'll notice that Ice Increase is the only exception to this rule, which means that you can use Ice Increase in between 2 other skills without it affecting the global cooldown. The final piece of advice that I want to give you is that when you're in a dungeon and you're leading up to a boss, you can go ahead and start using the entire flowchart on the normal mobs as well. This is useful because by the time you reach the boss, given that your team doesn't stand around too much, you'll already have gone past the first loop of that flowchart, which is the slowest loop, and you'll already be looping through the flowchart pretty fast. And that's pretty much it for the rotation for the Frost Mage. Now this may look a bit more complicated than for the Flame Mage, but it's significantly less finicky and it's much easier for you to not miss out on DPS due to issues like ping, because you don't really have to worry about timing with this rotation. You just have to worry about the stacks of resources that you have, which you can see very clearly at the bottom of your screen. Alright, so before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about the Inscribe Stone Tree for this spec. Now this may not be the most efficient or the most optimized build for this class, but this is the way that I found helps me maximize DPS as I progress through the game. The basic concept is to beeline to each of the emblem slots available in the tree. So start off by going to these 2 nodes by putting 1 point each on the left and the right side, and then putting in some emblems into these slots that boost these 2 nodes. Now these 2 nodes give you combo percentage, so they're very important. So max them out and make sure that they're boosted by these 2 emblems. Then you can beeline all the way to this emblem node, followed by beelining to these 2 emblem nodes here. The node that you decide to boost with this emblem node is entirely up to you. You can boost any of these 4 and that's completely your choice. After you've got these 2 slots filled in, you can go back and put extra points into this node here, which gives you additional combo percentage, as well as this node here, which also gives you additional combo percentage. Remember, you want to try to get to at least 42% combo percentage with this class before you work on anything else. So there you go. That's Tarisland's Frost Mage spec. This class has the ability to do insane and insanely consistent DPS in every dungeon, raid, and world boss that you'll encounter. In fact, there's really very few classes, perhaps only the Ranger, that can consistently out DPS this class. Like I mentioned in the intro and in my Flame Mage spec, I do believe that the Flame Mage has a slightly higher DPS ceiling, but because that class is so finicky and ping dependent, you'll almost always have a better time being the top DPS with the Frost Mage spec. So I highly recommend this class if you're interested in Mage style gameplay, in a class where the rotations change based on the resources you have available, which means that you have to think a little bit more, and if you're a fan of doing a lot of DPS. So I hope that I've either encouraged you to give this spec a try, or I've helped you get a little bit better in your raids, in your dungeons, and in your bosses. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.